to the Talent Optimization Podcast, the go-to podcast for CEOs and HR professionals wanting to bridge the gap between the strategy and tactical implementation of talent optimization within their organizations. Through interviews, predictive index, and personal experience, your host, Tracy Shirk, helps you discover the facets of talent optimization from both a CEO and HR perspective to truly create the dream team for your organization. Are you ready? Let's get started.
Welcome to the Talent Optimization Podcast. My name is Tracy Shirk, and we are chatting today about gratitude as we are in the month of November. And I'm so grateful that you are here with us, that you're listening with us every single week. And I'm grateful for the impact that you have inside your organization every day and those interactions that you have with your people, because they are your most important assets. So we have an amazing guest with us today. Sarah Gibson is with us, and Sarah has a learning and training organization, but she's also a Vistage Chair. And Sarah and I met a couple years ago through the pandemic, and we met in person for the first time 2 weeks ago. So Sarah, welcome.
Thank you so much, Tracy. I'm very excited to be here. And this is a good reminder for me as well as we enter the season of gratitude, thinking about ways of being grateful. And so I'm grateful I get to hang out with you today. So bonus.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm just so grateful for the conversations that we've had over the year, watching you grow your Vistage chapters as, you know, we've grown how we impact and serve our clients. It's been so much fun. So we're going to talk about gratitude today in a very specific kind of thread of feedback and, you know, looking at feedback as a gift. So I'm curious, how is feedback a gift?
You and I were talking about this earlier, Tracy, and I think this is really a great point to share right now. This idea that feedback is a gift, and there's actually a cycle to this. So you've got feedback as a gift, but then in addition to that, it gives you the gift of change. And those are the things that accelerate you and move you up within your organization. And so when we think about feedback, whether we wanted the feedback or not, there have been times where you're like, oh, that is exactly what I needed to hear. Or that piece of information right there transformed how I interacted with people and made me more successful. And I can think about times in my life where there's been some really specific feedback that was hard, but later on, after processing a little bit, it was the gift I needed. And so we do want to think about this whole idea of feedback as a gift, and then figure out like, how can we be grateful for both the good and the bad feedback?
Absolutely. You know, and something that I love is curious questions. And I think we've talked about curious questions before, and they're not questions necessarily that you're going to ask other people. Sometimes they're a question you're going to ask yourself. But one of the questions I will ask myself, especially when I know who I'm meeting with is somebody where I'm like, don't really want to meet with this person, or I'm nervous about it, or whatever else, is I wonder what 1% they can offer me that can be gold for me. Because that's essentially opening myself up to say, look, they're going to probably say a bunch of things I'm going to get frustrated about, especially when the feedback isn't, you know, welcomed or wanted, but we know we're going to get it. We can at least say, what's the 1%? What's the golden nugget of feedback that I can take as a gift?
I love that. And I rephrase a lot of times as truth and trash. What's the truth in this statement that they're going to offer me that's going to be really valuable? And what's the trash? And there are interactions that we have where sometimes you're like, it's 95% trash and 5% truth. And other times it's like, oh, wow, I need to sort that a little bit differently and figure out there are nuggets in here that they really intend for my good. It may not be presented that way. And that's the hard part, is sorting out, like, how do I separate that out from what's the truth in this that I need to process?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and I think about that and go, hey, our hand is always in it, right? Like in my trainings, a lot of times I hand out these creepy hands. It's like, hey, our hand is always in it, and you're going to receive things all day long that you may or may not want. But guess what? Your hand is always in how you react to that. And when you're giving feedback as well, your hand is in how that feedback is given. You know, are you giving it as a gift? Or are you giving it as like a dig? No. And then when we circle that back around, what do you want out of that feedback? If you want them to change something, give it as a gift versus as this negativity.
Yeah, absolutely. And then just thinking about the audience of this podcast in particular, if you think about HR and you think about CEOs and how those worlds align, there's definitely a piece there of like, how are we handing that feedback off? And are we receiving it well? So are we receiving feedback with open hands? So I'm going to run with your imagery. Are we giving feedback with high fives and receiving it with high fives, or is it coming in as a fist to to somebody who it's this blow? And that's not our intention. So if we really want to raise that organization and partner together, we need to figure out this feedback piece, and receiving it as a gift is key. So love that we get to focus on that.
Absolutely. And I know feedback has done a ton for you. And you kind of started with that at the, beginning of our conversation. And so how has feedback been a gift to you both personally and professionally?
Yeah, absolutely. So on the personal side, and it ties to professional as well, but I have a strong communication style, and it's one of those pieces that I forget how that impacts people. And when I first moved to the Madison area, and we've been here almost 20 years, but literally in that first year, I had 4 or 5 people have the guts, have the gift of giving me this feedback, which said, Sarah, you're super intimidating. And I get nervous when I'm in a room with you. And I was like, what? Right. And actually, I wanted to get in their face and say, what? Which is intimidating. But that feedback was something I had to process. It ended up being a gift because I could figure out, like, what are some of the behaviors that make me intimidating? I walk into a room, I ask a lot of questions, but I don't receive questions back. I make statements versus being curious. I come in and I don't look around and see who's in the room and evaluate what they already know. I just assume what I know. And that was not a mature spot for me to be at as a leader. And so that feedback was a key gift into just being able to change some of those behaviors, identify how I could be more effective with others. So it was both personal, because I really had to work through that individually. But then there was this professional piece where it accelerated what I was doing and what I was able to do, because I could be way more effective when I realized that we were in this as a team together. And I think sometimes that's where CEOs get stuck too, is they've been entrepreneurs, they've founded these businesses, they have to charge forward, and then they kind of reel back and go, wait a second, what was effective for me when I was a small organization is no longer effective as we grow, because I need to be changing. And so again, the feedback from HR can be really a gift for them or from their executive teams if they're open to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to chat a little bit about kind of, the 2 seats that HR and executives sit in, because that was the whole reason we really started this podcast, is to say, hey, where's the intersection between executives in the C-suite and the HR office? Because so often they're on 2 different pages thinking that they're aligned, and they're not, right? And, we talk a lot and say, hey, every business problem is a people problem, because it truly is. And for HR listeners listening in, listen to that feedback of, hey, do I truly understand what's most important to my executive team? And if I do, I need to speak their language as far as, hey, what are these business problems? And then be able to put them into a people strategy so that we understand what the people problems are, because then you can charge forward in an amazing way. And I guess, Sarah, one of the questions that I really have for you, you talk about CPR and crucial conversations. How do you look at that, especially when, hey, we're going in 2 different directions? How do we bring those together to have those alignment conversations or those crucial conversations so we don't consistently drift further and further apart?
Yeah, let me see if I can tie those 2 things together, because I think what we're talking about ultimately, a lot of times, it's the language piece. What's different between the language of HR and the language of the executive team or the leadership team. And even using the phrase culture, and we're trying to impact the culture piece, which might be the language of the executive team. And then the HR team has to put that into practice. And what does that look like on that front? And then aligning those. So the CPR concept from Crucial Conversations, CPR stands for content, pattern, and relationship. And you can use it individually or organizationally. And I think that's what I like. So let's say you and I have a discussion and we walk away, and there's something in my brain that goes, okay, I disagree with this thing that Tracy talked about. And from an HR perspective, I'm trying to figure out what the system and process is. And you, from a leadership perspective, are like, well, actually, this is important because this plays into our strategy and it's going to make us more billable, or any of the language pieces that come in. That's a content issue. If we do not connect on a regular basis or be curious about those questions and say, okay, I'm wondering how those align, I'm not sure that they're aligned, it might become a pattern that impacts our relationship or the relationship between our departments and our areas of the company. which ultimately impacts the relationship. And what ends up happening is I start going, well, HR, right? And I start labeling. So HR over here or the executive team over here, I'm identifying them as separate from me. And then that's an indication that we're on separate relationship patterns and separate relationship tracks. And we need to unite those and figure out like, what's the pattern that impacts our relationship and what content issue is different. So what you're talking about and what I'm hearing is there's this aspect of aligning language so that we can have the same conversation. We can quickly identify patterns before it impacts those long-term internal relationships. So that was a long answer, but making sure that
absolutely
it ties in.
Absolutely. And so often it is the language, right? So, what we see in our practice working with organizations is it's either the language or it is the CEOs don't on the surface value what HR is doing because they don't understand it, right? So especially like old school HR is very tactical and it is compliance. Well, most of our executives, and PI speak are mavericks or captains, which is like, let me go do my thing. And I see the vision. I don't care how the heck we get there, but support me in getting there. And HR typically is that brake pedal that's saying, whoa, 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 what about all these things? And the executive's like, just make it happen. Okay. And that creates this tension of they don't respect me or my position. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And what you're describing too is a sense of HR being transactional versus transformational. Right. And I think that there's a really big difference depending on your viewpoint of is HR serving just a function or are they a key part of the organization? So even getting some of those language pieces in there can be really key. And I love your PI piece of tying it into, we have different styles and gifts that we bring to the table. So how do we create the language around that so that in that content piece, it doesn't become a pattern, doesn't impact our relationship? So we'll tie it back to CPR as well. Like there's all of those things tied together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's tying all the pieces together. And it's also looking at and saying, okay, every business problem is a people problem. Let's take the business problem. Let's put it into this lens because guess what? We're always looking at things through different lenses. And multiple competing priorities is incredibly important. Conflict has to happen for us to move forward. So when we view conflict as, okay, we're having conflict here and we need to, because that's healthy to move us forward. So let's figure out our lenses and how we can do this together.
Right. Which again goes back to where is feedback a gift?
Yes.
Because if I receive it as a gift and I realize like we came at this from different perspectives and different lenses, what I love about that idea is it makes me realize that people do not wake up. And I've said this over the years, like people do not wake up and think, I am going to torque off Tracy today. It's going to be fantastic. Nobody wakes up thinking that. But the reality is sometimes my behaviors are simply different or how I receive something is different. So the more we can talk and provide feedback to one another in a really productive, healthy way, the more conflict we're going to have that is healthy conflict that will move us together as an organization, aligning departments, aiming us in the same direction. So it's a powerful piece and a gift.
Yeah, thank you for that. I really appreciate that. You have a great process with feedback, and I'm curious what that is.
Yeah, there's a couple of things that I think about in this process. The first one, it really depends on the situation, but if I'm meeting with somebody in person, I very often will say, are you open to some feedback in this moment? And I have never had somebody say, nope, not open to feedback. But I give them permission because they realize like that's kind of my door knock. Like I might have something hard to say. Are you in a spot where you can receive it? So that is oftentimes part of the verbal process. I may even do that in email and just shoot a message and say, hey, I've got some feedback. Are you open to that? And then wait for that reply.
And I think it's really important to say, if you have that question and you're not in an emotional or a spot right now to receive it, name that and say, actually, I've got XYZ going on. I'm in the middle of XYZ. I've got a deadline at 3:00 this afternoon, and that has to be my biggest priority right now. Is it cool if we connect at 4:30 or, hey, can we chat tomorrow morning? Like, that's totally okay.
It is absolutely okay. And recognize it. I think the question itself recognizes that there may be enough raw things going on in your life that you can't take in anymore. And I do a lot of one-on-one pieces and we get to some pretty deep places. And it's like, ooh, you may just be processing and discovering this. I can't give you feedback if you're not ready for it. So that's part of that purpose. So the second piece I usually do is just share what's working. And I think that that's so important. And I struggle on the feedback front because we've heard the KISS model, which is, tell them something nice, tell them something hard, tell them something nice. But I do think it's important to say, hey, this is what worked. This is what was powerful. This is what I appreciate about you. Have you considered? And I think it's more of a curiosity question that steps in there, as opposed to, this is what you should do. Have you considered? The people I work with are super smart. Like, they've thought about a lot of things. They may or may not have thought about this, but if I assume they didn't think about it, that's on me. And no longer is it a gift that I'm giving them. I'm shoving something down their throat. And so that, have you considered this? And it might be an alternate way of doing something. And I usually almost always say, this is really up to you, right? It's your choice. Here are some options that I see. Take what you want to take, leave what you want to leave, because we're all grown-ups and we all have purposes for why we're doing something. And I know you and I both have created training materials over the years. And sometimes people come in and say, you should do it this way. And you're like, I really purposefully designed it this other way for this reason. Mm-hmm. That's truth and trash, right? Here's the truth. Here's the trash. I'm going to take the nuggets away. What from their offerings are really true. So yeah, again, ask if they're open, share what's working, suggest alternate ways, or ask if they've considered this, and then leave it up to them if that input is helpful.
Absolutely. And I love to give folks visuals for this. And so I created I was delivering a training program to individuals that take new hire buddies under their wings and then are stepping into potential leadership roles after that last week. And the video clip that I pull in, we're both moms here. So for those listening, we'll put the clip in the show notes, but it's How to Train Your Dragon, where Hiccup's sitting there and his dad walks in and says, all of you is wrong. Everything about you is wrong. And he's like, all of me is wrong. Yes, all of you is wrong. Right. That's an example of probably not great feedback. But then, of course, later in the movie, it's like Hiccup plays to his strengths and, his strengths aren't the same as his dad's, All of you is right. All of me is right. Yes, all of you is right.
That's a perfect example. And I love those visuals. And that's a favorite movie at our house for sure.
So, and how should we receive feedback?
I think there's a really big piece of separating the emotion and the intent from what actually happened. So sometimes in the course of that feedback, it comes across more harshly than it's intended. And so again, that's that principle of truth and trash. And can I separate out like how I feel in this moment? Classic example, my husband might say something about my driving, like that was a great turn, or, you should have stopped more than what you did. So what's truth and what's trash? Like, he's yanking a chain and I know that, so I have to separate that out. Do I need to be more careful about stopping or slowing down around those corners? Probably, right? So whatever that is, I have to separate those pieces out. And I think it's also important that we ask some clarifying questions. So it might be, tell me more about this, or help me understand what I heard you say is this. Is this what you want or what you think you're suggesting? All of those things. And I think the other really big thing is just to thank them for the feedback. It took courage to offer you that gift. It's not a gift that's always easily given or received. So thank you. That probably was really hard for you to tell me that. And it means a lot because now I have a choice of what I want to do with that. So I wouldn't have had that without your courage.
Awesome. So as we kind of start to close out here, what's a takeaway for our executives and our CEOs listening in?
Yeah, I think really for the CEOs, it's leaning into those HR people as transformational components of our organization, not transactional. Thinking about HR and those people problems as allowing us to focus on one goal. And the feedback that you're getting from HR, the breaks that you're getting from HR are really not to slow you down as a visionary, but to align your organization. And that's the gift there. And then for the HR person, I think there's really a piece about how do we help our leaders and our managers coach well? And as part of that, how do we teach people to give that gift of feedback? And that can be practiced both with the executive level as well as training those underneath us on that front. So, using the process, that's significant for both groups and teams, but how do we then use that to move us forward as an organization to see it as a gift? So there's my long roundabout answer.
Awesome. So thank you so much for being with us today as we talk about feedback as a gift and gratitude and Again, for all of our listeners, thank you so much for listening in week after week. And, one of those best gifts of gratitude back to us is to give us a 5-star rating out on the podcast, whatever platform you use. Those ratings and those comments really help us out as we expand our reach and continue to give back to you. So thank you so much for listening. Thank you for your reviews, and we will see you next week. Have a great week.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Talent Optimization Podcast. You'll find more tools and resources for CEOs and HR professionals looking to bridge the strategies versus implementation gap of talent optimization at elevatedtalentconsulting.com. We've also created a free, valuable resource for you to begin bridging the gap called the Talent Optimization Foundation Membership Program. You can access it for free at elevatedtalentconsulting.com/foundation. Be sure to tune in next week for another episode to learn more about talent optimization and creating a dream team for your organization.